We're ready to go when you are, Mr. Chair.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a July 10th meeting of the Lakewood Planning Commission. So this evening, our prime objective is to take action on the 2024 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Review. And we do this after months of briefing from our staff, numerous reviews of our planning documents, after hearing from many of our citizens telling us how they felt about the proposed changes to the plan. But first things first, Ms. Spear.
Calling roll. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Robert Estrada.
Here.
Philip Combs is excused. Lynn Larson. Mark Hare.
Present.
Philip Lindholm.
Here.
Ellen Talbo.
Here.
And Sharon Wallace. Here. Thank you. You have quorum.
Thank you. Minutes dated June 26, 24. Hope you all had a chance to take a look at them. If I will accept a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Larson, second by Mr. Hur. Minutes be approved. All those in favor, please indicate with an yay.
Yay.
And no negative. Thank you. Ms. Spear, any updates to our agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So now we're at the portion of a meeting where the planning commission will accept public comments. Do we have anybody who signed up?
I do not see anyone who has signed up, and I also don't see anyone online, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then we'll close the public comments portion. And next would be our public hearing, and we don't have any public hearings this evening. So our unfinished business, which is our action on the 2024 Comprehensive Plan. Okay, so we're here, we're going to consider and take action on 3 resolutions. Although we have reviewed, as I indicated, for a number of months, I do ask Ms. Spear to please provide us a brief overview of each resolution, one at a time. And also, Ms. Spear, if you could remind us, is there any part of that resolution on which the City Council specifically asked that the commission review and make recommendations? Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to let you know, Mr. Combs has now joined you online, so he's here virtually. Okay, so as the chair just mentioned, we are here for action tonight if the Planning Commission is ready on the 2024 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Review. To the tune of 25 meetings, I think is what the Planning Commission has had since the fall of 2022. So thank you for your patience and your deep dive into this issue, particularly those who have been here since that point in time. There's 3 resolutions to take action on this evening. The first, numbered 2024-03, is the policy, the plan documents. So that's the comprehensive plan itself. There's a new 2024 Tillicum Woodbrook subarea plan. And then there's also updates to both the downtown subarea plan and Station District subarea plan. So that's one piece that you would take action on. The second is Resolution 2024-04, and this is related to development regulation amendments. And that runs through Title 14. There's a new proposed Title 16, Title 17, and then Title 18A, B, and C. And then the third is Resolution 2024-05. This is something that's actually new in front of you because of some recent internal review and questions from developers that have been interested in coming into the downtown subarea. And so the city has taken this opportunity to bring this amendment to you as well. What this would do is in the downtown subarea, allow for master planned developments, whereas right now those are only allowed in just the specific town center area. This would expand the ability to have a master plan development throughout the subarea of the downtown. So for instance, over by the Colonial District or further east. And then also it reduces the minimum acreage for master plan developments from 10 acres down to 5, just because the size of the acres available land in this area, 10 acres is asking a lot. So with the top priority by the city council, especially to have the downtown be where growth is happening, the idea is to make master plan developments more accessible to those who do want to develop or redevelop in this area.
Because that last one is new per se, and you did provide some information for us. Is that something that maybe we should consider not adopting at this time until we have more information?
There's information provided to you in the packets.
Yes.
The way the city has performed this process for the 24 periodic review, it is okay to take action on this evening. The city council will have a public hearing should anyone want to make comment at that point before final action is taken. So you can either hold it until September, or you could pass it forward tonight, knowing that the city council will have a hearing on it as well.
Okay, we'll discuss that when you get to that particular
Okay.
plan then. Thank you.
Sure. So just in terms of logistics, once you take action on these three resolutions, they will all be forwarded to the city council, and then they need to complete their review by December 31st of 2024. So as I mentioned, there's policy in the first document, and then the last piece of it is actually a rezone requested by our Parks Department, because the city is trying to continue to expand Wards Lake Park, and they have purchased this parcel, but it has not yet been zoned open space recreation to be included in the park. So that's something that is in the packet as well for 2024-03. There's some findings of fact which respond to conversations that you, as a planning commission, have had recently. So let me just take a moment to look at these with you. First of all, there is an existing comprehensive plan policy, subarea -1.2, which says develop and implement a redevelopment and also subarea plans for areas such as Springbrook. There's also an urban design strategy that exists in the current plan that refers to International District, which is primarily along the South Tacoma Way corridor, and talking about developing an individual identity for it through branding, visitor engagement, and city-sponsored events. There is a third mention here. This is one of the things that the chair said the Planning Commission has been asked to provide recommendations on as part of your process this evening. For the downtown transportation mitigation fee, it's not specific code changes at this point, but it would be a recommendation to the city council to leave it alone, replace it, consider other alternatives, make sure that it is working as it was originally designed to work. What you have in the draft documents is to say, update the administrative policy that has limited collection to what has come in so far, which is about 1/10 of what otherwise could have, and going to the date of when the downtown sub-area plan was adopted to look at traffic impacts, rather than going back with no stopping point into the past. The fourth one is to look at residential street design standard plans, meaning how designs for streets are adopted and accepted and developed here in the city right now, looking whether those need to be updated, and also looking at the city's capital funding policies and practices that are currently used in light of the additional housing units that will now be required to be allowed in single-family areas of the city over time. So those last two are where the council is looking for direction from you. And again, on that last one, it is not a specific code update tonight. It's, do you think the city should proceed with starting to open up the books, re-examine its street design plans, and also consider looking at how it seeks grants, how it designs streets in order to anticipate perhaps on-street parking sometime in the future in its residential areas. So the other piece related to the transportation mitigation fee, there was a specific question whether any of the funds that have been collected to date should be credited toward the cost of one of the identified projects in the downtown sub-area plan, which is an intersection signalization at Gravelly Lake Drive and Avondale. So part of the reason this question is being asked is there is actually a 10-year time limit for holding on to mitigation fees before they have to be returned. So the idea here is that by recommending to the council that this is where those funds they do have be spent, that would happen prior to them having to be returned.
Okay, before we go any further,
Sure.
let's concentrate on this one here before we mix with the other ones. So does any council, any commissioner have any questions or comments regarding this 2403? Mr. Lindholm.
May I ask what the balance is currently for that TMF fund?
If memory serves, it's about $175,000. So it's not a large amount, but if we had to give it away, it's taken 8 years to collect that much. So it would be beneficial to the city to hang on to it and use it if it can.
Do we know that that light's going to happen one way or another with or without those funds?
We do not know that because it would need to be, the remainder would need to be identified, the cost, either through grant funding or some other general fund action by council.
So what happens if those funds are allocated and the project doesn't happen?
Then if 10 years have gone by, they are returned to the property owner.
So to my mind, it depends how feasible and viable we think that project really is.
Okay,
What its likelihood of it actually
Is that-
happening.
Is that
Mr. Hurd.
intersection inside the area where the funds were collected from and intended to be utilized?
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Dalbo?
Is it the case that the, forgive me for not knowing the name, but the Barnes and Noble family apartments project, is it the case that that project cannot pay for the signal as an impact of their project because of the way that this TMF code is written? Do you know what I mean? Like, couldn't that signal hypothetically be an identified impact and therefore paid from that project directly?
That is a potential where if they find that there is impact from that project on that intersection, which they likely would given the small area we're talking about, then their fee could be credited toward that. And in fact, anything anywhere in this sub area, which is where that 175,000 has been collected, could go toward that. So yes, if they were to be, and I don't think they've made their final decision on what the mitigation fee will be because there's been a recent change in the number of units being built and the number of builders involved. So once the final decision is made as to what mitigation fee will be, because it's based on units and traffic counts, yes, it could be used that way.
I guess to follow up, if there were certainty that that project could and would be conditioned to pay for a signal at that intersection, then hypothetically, the 175,000 of TMF could be redirected to a totally other project, right?
If what you got out of the Alliance Residential project was enough to cover the cost, yes, then those fees could be used elsewhere.
Mr. Hurd?
I just want to at least say this out loud. This seems like a phenomenal opportunity to not use money just because it's there and return it to taxpayers because it was collected for a reason. It didn't get utilized. Now we're talking about potentially throwing it at a less than 10% of a larger project that it was not originally intended for. I think this is an amazing opportunity to send it back to where it came from and do some better planning as we move forward.
But the reason why it was, that particular project is being looked at is because there have been some significant issues there. And they feel that this was a way to correct it or help correct it anyway. That's what I'm thinking. Or is it just, as he said, we just have money, so let's put it someplace?
The money is there. It can be spent on any project within the list that's been identified for the whole downtown.
Mhm.
So none of the projects that have paid fees have a specific project their funds were dedicated to. And the use of these dollars on that particular project is being recommended because A, it's one of the lower cost projects in there. B, yes, the stress on the intersection warrants a signalization. But third, it is the intention to try and get those funds spent on something before they would have to be returned. And I see, Mr. Chair, that Philip Combs has his hand up.
Mr. Combs, please.
If you're speaking, you're muted.
Can you hear me okay, Chair?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Technical difficulties. Yeah, I appreciate what Commissioner Hurd said, and I tend to agree that if we don't have a specific dedicated need right now, it's better to give it back. And frankly, I think there's two things on the table. One of them is, what are we going to do with this program, the TMF in general? And it's clearly not working as intended. I think there is a need for transportation funds, and we need to figure out what that looks like. My suggestion is, this is a program that hasn't worked, and we need to, I would terminate it, would be my first recommendation. And then recommend that we evaluate what other options there could be, and look at that with a little bit more time and open eyes on it, so that we can backfill the transportation and try and understand that. And then I think I originally was going to say, yeah, go ahead and earmark that money. But after hearing Commissioner Herr, I think maybe what we do is say, we are going to look at this one traffic signal, and if there is a need and we can get the funds together within X amount of time, less than 10 years, because we don't want to do this and just kind of hold on to it, like he said, forever and hold it hostage. I would just say, let's look at it and evaluate it. And within 2 years, if we don't understand what that need is, we'll return it by then. And that would be my suggestion on how to move forward with this one.
Thank you, Mr. Combs. Mr. Larson, Ryan, please.
I concur with Mr. Combs, 90%. My preference would be to return the money directly within this calendar year, so that our intent is clearly shown to support the return of the money.
Mr. Lindholm.
Yeah, if I may, it just seems to me that this isn't an inappropriate use or an unforeseen use of this money. If it's a good use of the money and it's being used for the reason for which it was gathered in the first place. And I don't know if you've been to that intersection, but it's a dangerous intersection right now. It needs a light. I do feel like we're not operating with enough information. We don't know if this project's actually going to happen. We don't know how much is going to come from other places and where those other places might be. But it is the case that this money was collected for this type of purpose.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the majority, it appears that we're saying no. But Mr. Wallace?
I actually think that it's a dangerous intersection as well. I understand the concerns that the money's not collected, but it bothers me to leave a dangerous intersection in place and then have someone have an unfortunate incident, and we were worried about returning money because we didn't quite have the plan ready yet. That doesn't seem to me to be prudent to their lives lost or potentially injured.
Are we saying that the project would not happen if it weren't for these funds?
Not necessarily, but if I could repeat one more time, these funds, happens to be the intersection that's being discussed right now, but these dollars could be used on any of the projects in the downtown. It's appropriate and intended that they would have been used that way. This is just the one that's been brought to you because of its cost and the perceived need. Whether you have to wait another 10 years, no, you don't, because even if, let me start over. The fees went into effect when the plan went into effect, which would have been late 18, early 19. So we're 5 or 6 years into it, meaning there's 4 more years where if on day one, the fee was paid, then we hit 10 years and another 4, and it has to get returned. I couldn't tell you right now when all of those fees were collected. It was from multiple projects, and so at different time frames. What would start to happen is once you hit year 10 for the first penny, then it's going to be this piecemeal return if those dollars aren't used. But having said all of that, the project obviously can't be fully funded with these funds, and I don't know what other funding sources the city may be able to identify for it. It would be a matter of concentrating, seeking grant funds first and foremost, which is how the city generally funds its transportation projects. But if it can find something else, general fund dollars or some other vehicle motor tax, something else that the council might authorize, it might be funded before the 10 years is up, and then those dollars could go toward it.
So this could be like an impetus to
Yeah, it would be seed
find
money
other
for
money,
whatever
seed
else,
money
yeah.
per se?
Yeah.
Okay, one way of looking at it. Ms. Dalbo?
I guess I would just only add that, yeah, I don't oppose the idea of returning money that doesn't have a purpose. I also, like others have said, I also agree, we just don't know much. We don't know enough about the project. About the project being the signal. We don't know the cost. We don't have a timeline. And we don't know the funding strategy. So if the city plans to apply for a grant for that signal, or if the city plans to or anticipates using contributions from the Alliance project, because that project would impact the intersection. And so there's kind of a nexus there that needs to be, I think, explored. Or, there's kind of a nexus there that needs a determination to be made on whether that project's gonna kick over the
Mhm.
funding. However, if the city does go for grant funds to pay for the signal, the city will need a local match, and that funding does provide that revenue for a local match. But I think at this point, we just don't know enough about the project. So,
The only thing I can tell you in addition to what I have is that the 2018 projected costs, which are obviously out of date, was about 1.18 million. And so the 175,000, again, it's very low compared to the total cost, but that's where you're at ballpark wise.
Would you please bring up that slide again?
Certainly.
Thanks. Any other comments from commissioners? Mr. Herr?
Just one more point of clarity. So we are still inside the initial planned 10-year.
Correct.
My first understanding was that we were already at that point.
No.
That we had met the threshold for holding on to it and it hadn't moved. So we are still inside of that 10-year period.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Lindholm?
Is it possible to see a list of the other projects that might be up for consideration?
Not right now, but you can certainly take a look at it in the downtown sub-area plan.
Are the costs for those projects also outlined there?
They are, but again, it's $2018, so
Sure.
they're going to be out of date.
But it'd be apples to apples because this is $2018 as well.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. And I guess the thought process here for you as the commission is to say two things. A, do you want to redo the transportation mitigation program? But B, do you want to use these dollars or not toward this particular project just because that's the one the city sees as likely to be the first achievable project in the downtown? And you can answer one or both. You can answer differently for each. However what's your pleasure?
What is our pleasure? You want to answer this one first and then go to the second?
It's on the table.
Yeah, I think it's on the
Here?
table. Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, should the city council consider use of the TMF balance toward the cost to install a signal at Gravely Lake Drive and Avondale Road? So I need a motion.
I move that we vote no.
Is the motion that the commission not consider use of these fees?
Should it consider? That's a yes or no answer question. I recommend that we vote no.
Okay. Do we have a second to that? I don't have a second to that. Do we have another motion on the floor? Mr. Lindholm?
Can we have just one more point of clarity that I think is important? Ms. Spear just said something that I don't think I took enough weight to at the start, which is that this is the project the city has identified as being the most likely on the table.
The most likely to happen first because of its cost? Yes.
And to me, that's incredibly important because we don't want to pick a project that's going to land stale. We want to pick a project that's going to happen where these tax dollars are used well. If this is what the city is telling us, this is most likely to happen, I'm inclined to vote for it.
So are you making the motion at this time that we do in fact recommend that we use these funds?
I so move.
We have a motion from Ms. Lindholm. Do we have a second? Mr. Talbot has second. Any other discussion on this topic? Not, would you take a vote, please, Ms. Spear?
Thank you. And I'm going to do it by name just because I'm trying to do many things tonight.
Many
So
things at one
please bear
time.
with me. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Lindholm,
Yes.
Ms. Talbot,
Yes.
Ms. Wallace,
Yes,
Mr. Estrada,
Yes.
and I'll unmute. Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Hare,
Yes.
and Mr. Combs.
It's unanimous. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Spear, what's part two now?
Part two of that is the larger question of should the transportation mitigation fee program be re-examined? Sorry, I've lost control of the screen. There we go. So just should the downtown transportation mitigation fee program be reviewed by the city to, and again, this is up to you at this point, get rid of it, replace it, update it, improve its performance by making tweaks to it, whatever kind of direction you feel is appropriate.
Comment, Ms. Talbot?
I'll start off. Yes, I do think that it needs to be amended. Well, okay, no, I think it needs to be just rewritten completely. And I particularly am remembering a few meetings ago, there was a slide with kind of like 3 options. And we looked at kind of keeping it or just going by the traditional, like SEPA GMA way of collecting impact fees. And then I think there was another alternative. So I think we need to revisit those 3 options and if there's others. But yeah, I don't think it works, unfortunately, and it hasn't, unfortunately, it just hasn't served
Yep.
the purpose that it was intended to. So.
Thank you.
Another comment? No more.
I could add,
Mr. Holmes?
I would just second that and say, and make a motion unless other people have any comments on it, that we do terminate it as it is today, but put in to review new alternatives for how to properly set up and administer the program, a program moving forward to help meet the needs of the city.
Second.
Ms. Spear, could you repeat that as he has indicated, please?
To try to rephrase, and forgive me, Mr. Combs, if I get it wrong, but what I heard was a motion to recommend terminating the current transportation mitigation fee program as it is run and as it is written, and consider alternative options, which may or may not include impact fees, may or may not include SEPA mitigation, or it may include another option. Is that an accurate statement for everybody?
Is that what we heard? We're good with that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so it's been moved by Mr. Combs and second by Mr. Larson. All those in favor, please indicate with a yay. Yay.
Hey,
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? All right,
So that sound, excuse me, that was a unanimous yes?
that's unanimous, yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Again, apologies for the awkwardness here.
So we'll go from hey to yay to, all right.
So
Okay, that's only a
those
small
were those 2
portion.
questions. Do you want to take an action now on the resolution itself for the plans?
Let's
Or
go
do you want
back
to
to
keep
the,
talking?
go back to the sheet, please.
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry. There we go.
so is there anything else on this slide that members would like to discuss?
And if I could clarify as well, the first 2 related to the Springbrook policy and then the international district policy. This is the recommended way to answer the desire of Commissioner Larson to have these 2 parts of the city addressed. And so by looking at Springbrook and pursuing that implementation of the policy that exists, the sub-area plan may be its own, or that may be the consideration of combining it with Station District. And then the International District, that ties into Mr. Larson's request to do some rezoning along South Tacoma Way and Pacific Highway. So hopefully that would be the acceptable way to pursue this, but if Mr. Larson or anyone else would rather have this worded a different way or taken through different language, please, now's the time to talk about that.
Do we need to talk about it? Mr. Larson?
I need a bit more time on this. Quite frankly, it's a substantial departure from what my thinking was. But it also may very well work. So I want to, I'd like to defer for a day or two to be able to.
So
fully
you're
understand it.
recommending that on that particular item there, that we not go forward with that recommendation at this time? But that would, just let you know, that would slow down that resolution itself.
Yes, that would be correct.
The other option would be to remove these findings and deal with them later separately. If you wanted to do that, we could take that option.
That particular finding?
You could take out these first two bullets and move forward with the rest of the resolution and then bring back these topics if you wanted to.
Sure.
How does the rest of the commissioners feel about that?
That helps us keep moving a bit.
Mr. Hurd?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd make the motion to remove the first two items off of resolution 2024-03 so we can move forward with that resolution tonight.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Hurd, second by Mr. Lindholm. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. So now we need to adopt resolution 2024-03.
Correct. And so once more, at what you see here, this is the new improved version of the comprehensive plan. It is the replacement of the Tillicum neighborhood plan with the new Tillicum Woodbrook sub-area plan. It is changes to the boundary of the downtown sub-area plan because of the parcels that were rezoned last year. Some of you will remember doing that at the Planning Commission. And it's also removing Lakewood Landing references in the Station District plan because that project is not moving forward. And then finally, it's that rezone of the one parcel that the city already owns in order to be able to incorporate it into Wards Lake Park. So this is the content of 2024-03.
Okay, any comments for commissioners on those items? If not, I will accept the motion for approval.
I move to pass all these 2024-03 resolution as outlined.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Combs, second by Mr. Larson. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving right along, Ms.
All
Spears.
right,
Thank
thank
you.
you. So the next resolution, as I mentioned before, this is the one that includes all of the regulations. So what you've just passed is the policy. This is the implementing regulation package. And in 2024-04, you have, first of all, reference to Title 14, which is titled itself Environmental Protection, but it is the city's critical areas ordinance. You've heard reference to that as something that has to get updated as part of this process. And this is really focused on the discussion about buffer widths that was had at the last meeting, and there were some public, comment about that. But it's making additional changes to not only buffer widths, but to incorporate best available science that is now available and the city must comply with. And then the second piece related to that is incorporating the existing shoreline master program, which right now is a standalone document. We're just recommending to pull that into the code itself. And that's really for administrative ease of reference. Applicants are able to find it, but it's not suggesting change of content. It's just saying we're going to pull this into the code. The third bullet there is talking about Title 17, and that is related to subdivisions. The changes here are some technical amendments. It is discussing unit lot subdivisions, which is a new chapter in order to comply with the housing densification that the state law requires. This is the language in the code that would say, because we have this new law that says you have to allow so many units per lot, and there needs to be so many units allowed within your historically single-family areas. This is the way to split an existing residential lot It's a slightly different way than what currently is in our code, but it is what is required again under state law. So this is really reflective of what the legislature has passed. And then in Title 18A, that's where the majority of the changes are. This is all of the code that is being updated to implement the comprehensive plan that you just approved, as well as the sub-area plan code for 18B and 18C. Just a note, which isn't related to tonight's action, but just a note that this fall you will be getting a separate update to the Shoreline Master Program brought in front of you. It is related to all of this process, but needed to be handled separately because of the way Shoreline Master Programs are reviewed by the Department of Ecology. But that will then bring the critical areas ordinance in Title 14 and the Shoreline Master Program into full consistency with each other. So right now what you're doing is just saying the critical areas ordinance changes, and you're bringing the Shoreline Master Program into code without any change. Later this year, you'll talk about the Shoreline Master Program in specific. And then this is the other piece to talk about in addition to the full resolution. We've mentioned this a couple of times, and some of you were here for this last year. As of last year, there was a conversation where the Planning Commission of the time recommended to the City Council to allow short-term rentals, i.e. rentals for 30 days or less, in accessory dwelling units across the city. The city itself recommended to council and to Planning Commission to prohibit that because the allowance of the additional accessory dwelling units under the new housing laws was intended to create not short-term rentals, but long-term housing. The Planning Commission recommended to the City Council to go ahead with allowing short-term rentals in the ADUs. And rather than take action last fall, the City Council sent it back to you because they wanted to hear about this in light of all of the other things that we've now been talking about ever since. So as this resolution now reads, 2024-04, it has the original language from 2023's package, which prohibits short-term rentals in ADUs. If the Planning Commission does not agree with that, you need to make an amendment to change the language to where it would allow short-term rentals in ADUs. So that would be the conversation to have.
And let's start with that conversation. As Ms. Spear indicated, we as a unit did in fact agree to recommend short-term rentals in ADUs, and that was back a few months ago. Are we still in the same mindset, or have we, because of comments from the public, from new language in the law, have we reconsidered? Mr. Larson?
I have a question as to the reason why we would prohibit short-term rentals, because it does provide an economic benefit in the city. And short-term can become longer-term. And the turnover of short-term rentals in ADU X might very well contribute to the community in a viable way, as well as having a long-term domicile. So I don't know that it's really deleterious to the city to do that. Now, I think it's also something that's a law that we can change. If it's clear that ADUs are putting traffic pressure on neighborhoods and with turnover and that kind of thing for short-term rentals, then we have it. We have the ability to change that and to impose a regulation on it. So I just ask those questions. I'm not adamant about either one of them, but I think it's reasonable to think about.
Okay, Mr. Herr, and then Mr. Inholm.
Yeah, just a couple comments on this, Mr. Chair. First, the state has said that ADUs, everybody will be able to do that. I'm not a proponent of the state directing too much to me as a property owner in general. And certainly if you're going to tell me that I have to have it, I'm not appreciative of hearing how I have to utilize it. So if that is an opportunity for me to maybe create an economic benefit for my family, I think that should be allowed until there is a problem with that we can address at that time. I don't think banning outright short-term rentals in our area is really appropriate. Number two, we have such phenomenal tourism and visiting opportunities here in our area specifically. Why would we want to take away more opportunities for people to come visit and spend money in our businesses and see our attractions and our beautiful landscapes? I, for one, am a proponent of allowing short-term rentals until it becomes an issue that needs to be addressed, at which time we can consider the concerns of the moment.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lindholm?
Yeah, I concur with just about everything that's been said so far. I think the government doesn't build housing, homeowners do. And for a lot of those folks, it has to make sense. It has to pencil. This is one way it can pencil. And like Commissioner Herr, I'm very cautious to tell homeowners whom they can rent to and for how long.
Mr. Combs?
I raised my hand earlier before we got to this one, but I
Sorry.
will add on to what's been said. I concur with what's been said. I don't disagree, and great points by all.
Ms. Wallace?
I guess I'm going to have to be the one who disagrees. I have seen short-term rentals that maybe perhaps are not legal yet in the city that are being used. And what they do is they take advantage, I think, of the vulnerable. And I have seen them where they are living in hovels. They don't have adequate bathrooms, some of them. The ones that I know of don't. They don't have cooking facilities, et cetera. So I think that we're already having a lot of changes where we're going to allow accessory dwelling units that we can then police and make sure that they meet standards. They at least have a toilet for a place to go for the people. I mean, I can think of right now 2 places where they don't even have a bathroom, but they're living there. So I have concerns that I think we should let these changes that we are having now occur. We're going to have a lot of additional dwelling units. There's plenty of opportunity for homeowners to build reasonable, acceptable housing units that can be well managed, they can be looked at, they can follow regulations, as opposed to you can just short-term rent to somebody and they're gone in a few weeks, they don't have the time to complain and they're vulnerable. And I think that people will take advantage of them.
Ms. Jalba?
Yeah, I understand the thinking that, I understand the sentiment, and I, partially agree with the sentiment that, yeah, you don't want to misuse ADUs as a housing, as a way of long-term housing by misusing them as short-term rentals. So I understand that, but at the same time, I do think that prohibiting short-term rentals from ADUs is a little bit premature and presumptuous to be so restrictive at this point without knowing and having data to say that so many ADUs have been built and so many are being used as short-term rentals. I think the city is headed in the right direction of employing software or whatever it is, tracking these statistics, because certainly there are cities that just aren't doing that. And so it's proactive of Lakewood to do that. I think that's the right step to take. But in the meantime, I don't think that it's fair to overreact or prematurely react and prohibit them now. I think that if that becomes we need to know when and if it becomes a problem. So for those reasons, I tend to agree with Mr. Herr and Mr. Lindholm. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I want to say really quick is also, I'm dating myself, but I do remember I lived out of state during the PGA tour when it came to Chambers Bay, and I don't think that Airbnb was even, I don't think it was born yet. I think the only option if you wanted to attend that tour and come to Lakewood or University Place or wherever, stay in the greater area and be part of that experience, I think your only option was VRBO or whatever it is. But you couldn't find anywhere to stay. It was really hard for that event. And so to Mr. Herr's point earlier, just, for people that want to come and visit the area, it's advantageous in some ways to, it's advantageous for the city to have options.
Couple of comments. First of all, I believe the ADUs will fall under the rental inspection program.
Yes.
So hopefully we won't have that type of situation anymore. Number one. Number two, penciling it out, agreed completely. It's gonna cost me a bit of money to put in 1,000 square foot addition, wherever it may be, it's gonna cost. So can I afford to just rent it for 3 months at a time, a year possibly, for the PGA tournament to come in and have it empty? Because nobody else is going to rent that place for the other 7 months, knowing they're gonna be kicked out next time the PGA tournament comes in. That's another perspective. The third perspective is the intention of the ADUs by the government and by the federal government, by the state, was to provide affordable housing, not for you to make money. Making money is good. We're supposed to make money, but that wasn't the purpose of the law in the first place. And it's basically the same thing I said last time also. So, Mr. Herr.
Mr. Estrada, I would just have to point out that ADUs are financed by homeowners. What a homeowner chooses to do with their property is their purview and perspective and their penciling, not the banks, not the governments, and certainly not this council or this commission rather, or any other body. The law was, you are correct, put in place to allow more housing opportunities that fall within the economic funnel spectrum, however you want to phrase that. But to then turn around and tell the homeowner, you have the ability to do this. We're going to make it possible, but we don't want you to be able to selectively profit from that. I don't think that makes a whole heck of a lot of sense, from the perspective of what that property owner has to do to bring an ADU to life. It's not like tomorrow we're going to build 3,000 ADUs in the city of Lakewood and 2,990 of them will be short-term rentals. Certainly a percentage of them will be, but that is also another consideration for homeowners to take onto their plate. Now they are becoming pseudo landlords to, that short-term rental market, which is a whole other animal to be tackled when you move down that space. So I think creating or protecting the flexibility of homeowners to utilize those spaces that they're going to build out, to leverage them, whether they just have, a long-term person move in and they bring somebody in like that, or if it's for, maybe they own a property on American Lake and they're going to have that short-term opportunity available and feed the economy in other ways. I think it just, maximum flexibility was the intent of the law when that legislation came down, and this is just a continuation of that idea.
Mr. Lindholm.
Yeah, if I may, this is anecdotally, but I started renting a VRBO right around the PGA time. And I think I had an impression that I'm hearing kind of across the commission now, which is this is primarily for folks who are out of town. And I was very much surprised that after I rented my home for a couple months, that a lot of the demographic that I found were folks who were being displaced from their local home for one reason or another. I had several folks almost in a row where someone's floor had flooded, where someone's dog had completely chewed up the kitchen. They had to remodel. They couldn't live there. Several instances where local communities benefited from local short-term rentals. And I think that's often forgotten.
Interesting. Mr. Larson.
Another way to put what you were saying earlier is that this is a basic property right. And if it's endemic in a single-family home, to have a property right that you can invite guests on a short-term basis or a long-term basis within your rights of property ownership, then if you have an additional dwelling unit on your property, those same rights should confer onto the additional dwelling unit. It is part of the same real estate. And I have a almost 50-year career in this, and I feel very strongly about the being a property right. And so that I would submit.
And one last comment, Ms. Spear. Something about, we talked about, they're not going to progress to be Airbnbs. I'm sorry. So because we do have some specific policies and laws concerning Airbnbs. So a short-term rental could not move to that same category. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding. Let me pare it back and see if I got it right. So you're asking if someone were to build a short-term rental, they may or may not actually end up being a short-term rental through Airbnb? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't we have rules to follow if it's an Airbnb versus a short-term rental, or is that the same?
It's the same thing. So the accessory dwelling unit is the non-primary residence, whether it's attached to the primary residence or separate from it. The ADU in and of itself could be owned by somebody else. It could be mother-in-law, it could be short-term rental, or it could be long-term rental. ADU encompasses all of those things. Short-term rental is really just limited to that 30-day window or less. And it might be that the person who is advertising for people to come in and rent, try to do that on their own. They don't need to sign up with any of the online advertisers. Airbnb is one of those advertisers. VRBO is another one. So that's Airbnb, we've kind of used like Band-Aid. It's actually a brand name, but we just use Band-Aid all the time as the general word. And so something has happened with Airbnb the same way. So an accessory dwelling unit, whether or not it's a short-term rental, it has to be allowed, and there has to be the allowance for more units than there was previously under the new state law. That same state law does allow a city or a county to prohibit ADUs to be used as short-term rentals. That's in the law, but it is an option. And so what you're talking about right now is whether you would recommend to the city council to prohibit short-term rentals in ADUs or not. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, any other questions, comments? So how should we phrase this, going back to the motion?
If what I am hearing is a consensus or a unanimous position that short-term rentals should be allowed in accessory dwelling units, the motion would be to remove this language from 2024-04 that prohibits short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units.
Do I hear that motion?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Herr, second by Mr. Larson. So we'll take a vote. Ms. Spear, would you please do a?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Talbot?
Yay.
Ms. Wallace?
Nay.
Nay?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Estrada?
Nay.
Mr. Combs?
Aye.
Mr. Larson?
Yay.
Mr. Hare?
Okay.
And Mr. Lindholm?
Aye.
So if I got that correct, we have 5 voting yes, and Ms. Wallace and Mr. Estrada voting no. Okay. So motion passes.
Okay. Thank you very much, y'all. Thank you all for the comments. Okay, part 2 or 3?
So part 2 would be then going back to the full resolution 2404, now with that clause removed, meaning you would be voting on a resolution that does not prohibit short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units, which is what you just did, but it does contain all of this other language. So if there's anything specific you want to talk about here, or if you're ready to take a vote on this now amended resolution, that's where you're at.
Mr. Combs.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that we talked about this, and I think your last sentence on this answers, but I want to make sure I'm clear. My concern last time related to critical area and shoreline is that how we define bodies of water or critical areas and what they are. And we were proposing that we adopt all of the state's recommendations as opposed to looking at it and seeing if it made sense. And so I think that that last line is to say, we want to clarify what those options are for riparian buffers. Is that in response to my comments last time, or am I mistaken?
I believe, Mr. Combs, that the answer is partially in response to your question, as well as the position that the city is proposing to take. What is now included in this language for Title 14, the Critical Areas Ordinance, is that for type F, as in Frank, water bodies, which are the ones that would, in theory, have fish in them, as opposed to those that are considered non-fish bearing, would have not the recommended 200-foot buffer, from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, but would have a smaller buffer of 150 feet. And that is going to be backed up by what's ongoing through our consultant process right now to back up that reasoning for why that's still considered effective for no net loss of ecological function. The remainder is for type N or non-fish bearing, either perennial, meaning the water is there all the time, or seasonal, meaning the water comes and goes, but there's no fish. Those would be the same under the WDFW's recommendation and also the city's recommendation, which is the 100-foot. So the only potential change here is the 150 to 200 foot on fish-bearing water bodies. And then where we are sitting right now with this draft as it reads is it is at the 150-foot width.
Other questions, other comments?
Just one,
Ms. Talbot?
just one clarifying question, and I remember from the discussion the last time that the explanation for why the city wanted to go with the 150 versus the 200 was because it sounded like your consultant reports indicated so. And so just for, I can support that, but I think just for clarity on the public record, what was the specific technical rationale for that 150 is okay?
Sure. Let me see if I can actually get down to a map that explains that. So let's see.
Could you also provide why they state recommended the 200 feet? So I could understand why
Sure.
one recommended one and the other.
Sure. And I may just be wasting your time here, but please bear with me as I try to find what I thought was in here. Don't get dizzy. Okay, I'm not going to be able to find it right now, I don't think. My apologies. Okay, if you recall the maps that were presented on June 26th, it showed you in red, gold, and pink and blue different water bodies, right? And the blue ones were the ones that would continue to be regulated under the Shoreline Master Program because they are considered shorelines of the state, and they have their own widths and everything that's covered in the Shoreline Master Program. The critical areas is where the change is being proposed for those type F as in Frank and type N as in Nancy water bodies. And the WDFW's recommendation is to use what's called site potential tree height at 200 years. And so if you break that down and think about what that phrase means, it's if you were to see a tree, call my arm a tree, and it's 200 years old, this height, lay it down and create a buffer at that length, okay? And if you do that and measure the distance there, it's recommended for Doug fir, which is the primary mapped tree for this area, is 200 feet. Okay, so again, if this is your Lakewood Doug fir, that's the 200 foot, that's where that comes from. If you go back to what is considered the quote, best available science that is available from DFW, that does not incorporate this. This is more recent than their last best available science update. It is recommendation, it is guidance, and many would argue that that is where the city should go, but it is not what is required to comply with best available science, which is in a different volume of what WDFW has prepared. The reason we're now talking about 150 feet is that there has been analysis by Kitsap County, Pierce County, Clark County, and then we are in the process of doing it for Lakewood as well, that shows 150 feet, I believe, gets you to 93% of the benefit that the 200-foot buffer would. Couple that with the fact that we are in the middle of a city, we are in the middle of a regional urban growth area per the Pierce County Regional Council, or Puget Sound Regional Council, and there has already been significant interruption to buffers and ecological function within the city that will never get recovered because it is built out. It is an urban area. So the city's position is we are following that 150 feet because it gets to that 93%, hope I'm quoting that correctly, I believe that's the number, of the ecological function that a 200-foot buffer would do. However, taking that 50-foot reduction means for those property owners near the fish-bearing waters, they will not have to go through that process. Because if you think about the size of lots in Lakewood and you say 200 feet away, you have to be looking at this versus 150, maybe you're talking 1 or 2 lots less of an analysis that a property owner would have to do before they can be determined what type of use they can have on their property. So all of that to say, the intent here is to try to, on the one hand, yes, improve the ecological function regulations that we have for these areas, but at the same time, recognize that we are a city and that the 200-foot maybe makes sense in a rural area, but it does not make sense in the middle of Lakewood.
Mr. Larson.
I really support the fact that the city is taking a look at this hard and realize that there are limits, and this works a lot better for the city than a global rule that goes statewide. I think it's a good idea that we support the city's perspective. I wonder though, what happens when that 200-foot tree grows a foot a year and is then a 210-foot tree in 10 years later? What's the foundation for using that as a rule for a buffer? I don't think it has, it doesn't make common sense to me. I just wanted to put that out there.
There is a multi-100-page volume from DFW that explains it. I'm happy to send you the link if you like.
I'm sure.
We're accustomed to going through 1,000 pages at a time, so that's
Yeah,
okay. We
yeah,
can do
yeah.
that too.
Fair is fair.
Any other comments?
That you do have a hand up from Mr. Combs.
Mr. Combs, please.
No, I'm sorry. I just, it was still up from before. I want to be very clear. My question is about specifically the non-fish bearing bodies of water that are being classified as fish bearing. Like the stormwater specifically that I mentioned last time, it's classified that way by the state because at some point there was a critical area there, and we heard that last week or last meeting. But is it supposed to be a lake? And it's not. It's supposed to be a storm.
Thank you, Mr. Combs. I'm remembering now the conversation that was had. So if you remember on the maps, the rest of the commission, the pink areas that were on there, and they were considered, quote, unclassified, meaning it wasn't said this is a fish-bearing stream or not. And the way that is being recommended or required to be regulated is that they are treated as non-fish-bearing water bodies. So it's Owens Marsh, and I think there's another marsh in the city where the buffer would be 100 feet, again, because that's what those gold ones on the map, the non-fish bearing ones, are at. The 100-foot for the non-fish bearing water bodies is best available science, and the city is of the opinion and position is pretty clear in state law. We need to follow that, so we're going to go with it. And the non-classified, that is a pretty standard position as well, to say you're going to use the non-fish bearing width on that as well. So the marsh may have no longer been a marsh for however many years because it's now a retention or detention pond. However, WDFW has categorized it as this unclassified water body, and the city has no authority or ability to change that classification. It would be a matter of WDFW coming back, looking at it again and saying, we're going to change our mind for whatever reason. This is no longer considered a water body to be regulated. And so because of that series of steps, the city's recommendation that's in your resolution before you is to treat the unclassified water bodies as the same distance for buffering as the non-fish bearing water bodies.
150, 100, and 100.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? So
Yeah,
we're ready
just to close up, Chair Estrada, I don't understand why. I understand that there's a recommendation that we want to move forward with this. I don't know why we would accept something that we know isn't accurate, even though the state or has said that. I'd be fine moving forward with their recommendation with the caveat that we relook at it, because if someone has a puddle or a small water feature in their yard, the state could classify it, or, you know, and then all of a sudden we're having to adopt or go around this. If they say there's a type of fish in a lake or a body of water that there isn't any fish in, we got to stop and say, wait, that doesn't make sense. And that's all I'm saying here is I'm not willing to agree that there's fish in something that there shouldn't be fish in, and that we know there shouldn't be fish in, just to satisfy, you know, the state. I'm okay with moving forward with the program as long as we're willing to adapt it so that we look at each of those designated areas as they're defined there and say, yeah, that does not make sense for us. Just because it is a recommendation doesn't mean it's something we have to adopt. That's all I'm saying. And I've worked on enough of these. It just is a nonsense kind of thing to me, but that's all I have to say on it. And I'm willing to move forward with whatever everyone else has on that.
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Taking that into consideration, how would we address that?
Yeah, I guess my only response back to Mr. Combs is that this is not the same type of a recommendation as, for instance, the site potential tree height. This is saying the WDFW has classified this water body as such. They've made the decision. They have the authority to do so. The city does not have the authority to change that without WDFW coming back and changing the classification. So it's not like we recommend and it's guidance to use 200 feet and we're going to, as a city, say 150. This is a different level of decision authority from WDFW. So you can take.
Then my
Right.
recommendation would be not to accept it, knowing that I wouldn't vote for it, knowing that it doesn't work. Like if we can't have it work for our city, it doesn't make any sense. So specifically the non-fish bearing being classified, like those are the ones we're trying to classify stuff. And if we can't reconcile that, then I wouldn't vote for something I know isn't right. So I guess that's my thing. If we're saying, hey, it's their best guidance and knowing that it's not accurate, I wouldn't be able to vote for it.
Okay, do we have anyone else who wants to support Mr. Combs in this effort? And we can't do a sort of an amendment or such, or a note saying this is how we feel, although
You can certainly add a finding of fact that to the resolution that says, with respect to the unclassified water bodies and how they're being regulated, Planning Commission is opposed to X, Y, and Z. You can add that into the resolution, yes.
Would anybody else be willing to, Mr. Herr?
Presumably there is a recourse available with WDFW where we can ask for a reassessment of those particular areas. Is there a methodology, a vehicle available for that?
For the property owner, the city cannot do it by itself. The property owner has to be involved. And it is the process of them coming out and making the decision. Again, the city has no authority to change that designation. So there is the process, but what the city is recommending to you this evening to take action on is to use the same buffer widths that you would for the non-fish bearing streams on those unclassified waters.
Okay, then let's move forward with the vote. Then would you please bring that slide back up again? So.
Sure.
So we need a recommendation to approve resolution 2404.
Yes, sir.
So moved.
Ms. Wallace has moved.
Second.
Mr. Larson has second. Excuse me, Dr. Wallace has moved. Mr. Larson has second. All those in favor with a yes or a? All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
Nay.
We have one nay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Combs, and thank you all for the rest of y'all for moving forward with this.
All right, we have one more to go. So this resolution is 2024-05. This is related to that change that I mentioned at the start to the size and location of where master plan developments can happen in the sub area, the downtown sub area. This is a result of the third biennial review that happened a few months ago of the downtown plan to show this is the type of activity that's happened so far, and then couple that with some conversations that have been had with the city's staff by developers interested in moving forward in the area, but because they weren't able to access the master plan development option, either because of the size or because they weren't in specifically the town center part of the sub area, that we are recommending both the change in size and allowing it anywhere in the downtown.
Comments from Commissioner?
So,
Mr. Hurd?
make a quick comment. I think anything we can do to encourage development on a larger scale is beneficial to the downtown sub area, and this would be a welcome adjustment based off of the previous recommendation.
Other comments?
I had just had two comments and
Ms.
then.
Wallace, go ahead.
Thank you.
Dr. Wallace.
The first is, I think that we need to comply with what the state has mandated, and I'd like to see us do that in a responsible way. One of the things I noted with one of the large master plans that we approved is that every single tree has been marked for removal, even the ones that are not on the way, and we're probably talking 30. And I wondered about the benefit of that, plus for a large 3,000 unit, there was no mention of parking. So I'm concerned that we ought to, yes, we need to do these developments, but the design on some of them seems to be somewhat incomplete on some of them. And I wonder, how could we do that better so that we don't unnecessarily take the beautiful parks of Lakewood and make them less so, but also we provide appropriate places for people to actually live with parking and attract the type of people we want. So is there a way to get these things to be reviewed so that we get what we're wanting out of them? We're ending up with the buildings that we want. Is there some sort of a design committee, or is there a process that we can improve so we don't end up with these gaps?
Well, actually, the master plan development is a better option to try to get to what you're asking about than the straight up code. Because under a master plan development, the idea is you're giving more in order to be able to depart from the standard code. So it allows for the city and the developer to kind of negotiate a little bit more than the just complying with the code does, to say, if you're going to get so many more units per acre, for instance, maybe that's what they need or want, then you need to retain more trees. So redesign the footprint of your buildings in order to be able to do that. That would be something kind of related to what you just mentioned. Under the current code, though, you are required to maintain, preserve, and plant trees under our current tree code. And there's also the requirements for open space for projects. There's requirements for how the building sits on the property to preserve critical areas, et cetera. So that's all there in code now. But the master plan development allows for additional individualized discussion between a proposed developer and the city to, if there's a special something that the city is really hoping for, that's where they have a little more room to negotiate. I think that's all I'll say. You said?
And just one last question on that, please.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. And that is, then who looks at that so we end up with a design that's a kind of a cohesive whole in the city? Just for my edification then, is that, do we take that into consideration? Do we look at those aesthetics so that we end up with the buildings that we're happy with, or how does that work?
There is no design commission per se. However, when you have something under certain rules of the code, it has to go to the hearing examiner. There's a public hearing, there's review, and the hearing examiner approves or applies conditions to a project. Another route, which may happen with a master plan development, is that it actually ends up in front of the city council, kind of like our multifamily tax exemption program does, where the project comes to them and they say, is this enough of a trade-off for what they're getting in terms of their tax exemption? So there is that additional review by hearing examiner, by the city council. Otherwise, it's an administrative process by the department.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. Other comment, Ms. Talbot?
I can support the resolution in front of us, but to just kind of add on to Ms. Wallace's point, and what I've been advocating for too, is I think as the city implements this policy, I think the next step in really implementing it is re-looking at some of the form-based code and ensuring that when these master plans come in, that they come in with a baseline of design expectations that are specific, so much so that even if that's, I don't know if it's an overlay zone, but that there's a minimum setback that's established, that that there's perhaps a percentage of tree canopy that's retained, that there's building heights that are acceptable, and that all these design aspects are specific and context sensitive and characteristic and suitable for the master plan versus relying on the form-based code as it is in the development code. Because what I've seen in the development code is, we have like 90-foot building heights and 0 lot lines. So like it's kind of this outdated, in my mind, it's a bit of an outdated code that I think was, God bless Dave Buer, but I think it goes to like this time where it was like, okay, we'll just allow for anything that we can get in. But, the community has voiced through this comp plan process that they really do want to see some design sensitive, specific, baseline elements, such as whether it's retention treatment or green aspects in a development. And so anyway, so that's, I just want to make that point, that as we go forward and getting to implement this, that the city then considers the next steps of perhaps being a little bit more specific in the design treatments that are expected at a baseline level for these master plans to come in.
Thank you, Ms. Tobin. Ms. Wallace, Dr. Wallace?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that. Perhaps we could look at what they do, not to look at other cities necessarily, but I think Seattle has a very nice design program. I don't necessarily agree with all of some of their building designs, but they look at it and try to do what they believe is aesthetically congruous. And they do take into account those in an organized way. And I think that's something that we're missing. And I don't think we should rely on developers to necessarily do it, or somebody who's got to do that as a second job on the side in the city council. That's not, or, people who work in the city's office, that's not exactly fair. I think it needs to be an organized process. Thank you.
Seeing no further comments, then we're ready to act on Resolution 2024-05. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Mr. Herr has motioned. Ms. Talbot has second. All those in favor with A, please.
Aye.
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 No? Okay. Ms. Spear, we're good. We have completed, after how many months? 25, did you say 25 meetings?
I have to say congratulations to all of you. Pat yourselves on the back. I'll pat myself on the back. So yes, that concludes the work right now for the 24 package for you. Thank you very much. I would, though, if you're interested, encourage you to kind of keep track of what happens with this as it moves along. The city council will start their discussions on July 22nd, and they will have their public hearing on August 19th. They are currently scheduled to take action September 16th, but if they need more time, they'll take more time. But what you have just done gets them the policy and the regulation needed to accomplish what's required by state law, and also reorganize our comp plan to be more readable. So thank you.
And also thank you and staff for all of your work in completing this and getting this off the ground, and the hosting the events, that the open houses, the events. I attended a couple, and so kudos to you and the team.
Thank you.
Second, Ms. Talbot. That's
Thanks.
quite a bit. Any other comments from commissioners? Mr. Belkey? You have a few words for us, sir?
Yeah, I'm here.
Well, and you're not here, and it's getting a bit warm.
No, I can't, I can't get my video on.
That may be me. Just a moment. Yes, go
Not
ahead
the-
now. It should work.
Not that they want to see me. There it goes. All right. Hey, thank you very much for all your work on this. It's a big lift, and we'll see if we're done by September too. And what, we'll take a look at some of the things. Thank you for your really good discussion on the issues. I think you're wrestling some of the opinions I hear are exactly some of the same things we're bringing up at council, trying to get our arms around some of these items. And I just don't know where we're at right now on some of these. So we'll see. We'll take your recommendations and see where we're at. So thank you very much. So enjoy the summer and go to Summerfest. And that's about all I got from here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. You have a good summer also. Which reminds me, we don't meet again until when?
That is correct. You are now on hiatus. So the next meeting that you will be at is actually after Labor Day. It's September 4th. So please enjoy the rest of your time off. Thank you again for accommodating all of the weird schedule with summer holidays and when these meetings would have fallen. So again, very much appreciated. If you have any other questions about what this will look like going forward, like the findings of fact, that sort of thing, I'll send you the link to the city council's package for July 22nd. If you just want to see if by some instance I have incorrectly incorporated what you wanted to have incorporated, then by all means bring that up to me in the council. But otherwise, thank you.
And I would encourage members also to attend city council meetings and study sessions when you can. It's quite insightful. And I want to thank you all also for your comments. We all learn a lot, and especially from you all experts. I learned a lot also.